Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, part of our summer webinar series hosted by the Global International Engagement Office at the IU School of Education. I am Suliani Jati, and I will be your host today. Today's webinar covers non-immigrant visa options and immigration topics for international students. We are excited to invite Joanna Snyder, Director of the International Scholars Advising at IU's Office of International Services, she's here to lead the session. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. I'll share the link in the chat box later. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box anytime during this webinar, and Joanna will have a question break for you to answer all the questions. Now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Joanna. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us this morning for this information session. We are providing this session to give School of Ed students information about a variety of visa options that might be available depending on your specific circumstance or your employment options after graduation. And so we are going to go through several different options that you might need to be aware of so that you would be able to tell your employer what visa options you have for accepting that employment. Our goals for the session this morning is just to familiarize you with the visa system and familiarize you with some options that are available. Additionally, we want to make sure, again, that you know as a student what your options might be for employment if you continue in the U.S. To pursue that option after you complete your degree. And then we also not only want to help you with short-term options, but also thinking about long-term options if you have a long-term desire to stay in the U.S. and work, and we will give you some of those options. There will be a couple of points during the session where I will stop and I will answer some questions, and so you can use your Q&A box to put some of those in. I would ask that if you have questions, you make them general questions. We're not going to be able to answer specific questions about specific student scenarios. Okay, if we can forward to the non-immigrant visa options screen. One more. This is a very short list of non-immigrant visa options that may be available to you for pursuing a stay in the U.S. There is a letter of the alphabet that corresponds to various non-immigrant visa options, so that the list is long, and this is an abbreviated list. You may be in situations where you are in the U.S. for very short terms after you complete your degree. Maybe you go home and you find a job there, and you come back to the U.S. on short-term programs. Or you may be in a situation where your desire is to stay in the U.S. after you complete your degree. And these are some of the non-immigrant options that are specifically employment options that we're going to talk through today. On the next screen, probably many people on the call are in F1 student status. And so just be aware that there are practical training options, optional practical training, and curricular practical training that may be available to you as a part of your F1 status. This is employment that is directly related to your course of study. And on the next slide, there's some information about curricular practical training. This training is typically while you are still pursuing your degree, so you have not completed your degree yet. It is employment activity that is directly related to your course of study. So, for example, If you are in a degree program that requires an employment internship before you complete your degree, that would most often fall under curricular practical training. And some things about curricular practical training, you apply for that through OIS. There is an e-form in Atlas that you will submit to start the process. You do need to have a job offer. You do need to be enrolled in a course of study, and there is no direct fee for applying for curricular practical training. Not every work experience fits into curricular practical training. But if you do have a work experience opportunity that's directly related to your degree, it might be something that fits into curricular practical training. So that would be a situation where you would want to talk with a student advisor in OIS. Another option that you've probably heard of if you're an F1 student is optional practical training. Optional practical training typically is employment that's taken at the end of the degree. So after you finish your degree, you're eligible to apply for work authorization in your field of study. The process starts by submitting an application in Atlas, where an OIS advisor will review your request, and then an application is submitted to USCIS. So you have to mail an application to the Immigration Service, and the Immigration Service is the final adjudicator of if the OPT will be granted. There are fees associated with this that you have to pay. Optional practical training does not require that you have a job offer at the time you apply. So you may have a job offer and need to apply for OPT, or you may be finishing your degree and you don't have a position yet. You can still apply for OPT if you are eligible. Generally, you are eligible for up to 12 months per higher degree. So for example, you finish a bachelor's degree, then you would be eligible to apply for 1 year of OPT based on your bachelor's degree. You return to school and you get a master's degree and you finish that degree, and then you would be eligible to apply for another 12 months of OPT based on the master's degree. Then if you decide to go back to school and get another master's, maybe now you want to get an MBA, you would not be eligible for another round of OPT at the same level that you've already completed. So it's 12 months per higher degree. And then if you are in a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, math field, you may be eligible for an additional 24 months of OPT work authorization, depending on your degree, and an advisor in OIS could help you with that. Okay, let's talk about some limitations of OPT, which is the next slide. OPT requires, as I mentioned, that you submit an application to the Immigration Service, and they decide if you are eligible, and if eligible, they will issue you an employment authorization document, an EAD, and that card is needed to be employed, and you can only work on the dates, between the dates listed on the card. So one limitation is that maybe you apply for OPT and then you get a job offer, but USCIS is still processing your application. You're not eligible to start working until you have the card in hand. Another concern that we see happen sometimes is that it can be difficult to renew a visa abroad. So for example, if you are on your OPT and you decide you're going to go home for a visit, and while there, you decide that you're going to apply for a new F1 student visa to return to the US to finish your OPT, it could be difficult in that the consular official may say that they are not going to give you an F1 student visa since you've already completed your degree program, And if you really want to return to the US to work, your employer should apply for a work visa, like an H-1B, for example. So if you are in a situation where you apply for OPT and you have travel, specifically travel where you might need to get a new visa, you're going to want to talk to your employer. If you have an attorney, if you have an advisor in OIS, you'll want to talk about those travel questions before you travel. While you're on OPT, because the OPT is a status for employment, there is a maximum number of unemployment days that you have eligible. So, for example, you are required to report your days of unemployment, and there's a maximum of 90. So if you haven't been able to find a position while you're on OPT, that could be problematic. OPT is full-time, 20 hours per week or more. The employment does need to be related to your major. So that can be a limitation in that maybe it's difficult for you to find a position in your field of study. OPT status requires employment in your field of study. So any employment you undertake, you would need to be able to demonstrate how it relates to your major. And then while you are on OPT, there are reporting requirements that are required. The Immigration Service requires that you report unemployment, new employment, any status or address changes. So you do need to remember to keep track of those things. Okay, I'm going to stop briefly just to see if we have any questions. And there is a question about social media accounts and OPT applications. I think the question is probably directed at some of the new requirements for applying for visas, and when applying for visa, having to make social media accounts public. I think it is important for students to remember that the directives that are being issued presently are for the visa application process, but students should be aware that within the broader immigration departments, the different immigration departments within the U.S., you should pay attention to what you post in social media accounts and just be aware that those may be reviewed at various stages in an immigration process. Another question regarding changing jobs while on OPT. Yes, that is possible, and that's one of the benefits of OPT. Maybe you start one position that has, they offer you a 3-month position, and so you start that employment for 3 months, and when that employment is finished, then yes, you can change jobs to a new employer. So there is some flexibility within OPT. That could be a benefit to you. On the OIS website, there is quite a bit of detailed information about OPT, a lot of FAQ type of question and answers that you will probably find helpful. There is also detailed information on the OIS website about how to apply for practical training and starting the process through Atlas. So at any time, if you are an F1 student and you have questions about F1 practical training, you're welcome to contact OIS. You can contact us obviously by phone, by email, or you can come to our office. And we have staff available at our front desk, and you can make an appointment with an advisor if needed. Okay. We will move on briefly from OPT to talk about a couple of other options that might be available. One is J1 academic training. Similar to F1 students, J1 exchange visitors in the student category are also eligible for a period of academic training. It works a little bit differently than the F1 OPT. J1 academic training is authorized by the program sponsor. So if you have a DS 2019 that was issued by Indiana University Indiana University is your program sponsor, and we would authorize you for academic training if you're eligible for academic training. In most cases, you would be eligible for up to 18 months of academic training. If you are a PhD student at the end of your PhD period, you may be eligible for 36 months of academic training. So that's a little bit longer than the OPT period on the F1 side. Academic training can be full-time or part-time, and there is no salary issue that we have to be concerned about. So in a few minutes, we'll talk about the H-1B visa that requires a certain salary, and that does not apply for academic training or practical training. There are some limitations, though. Not all sponsors authorize academic training. So, for example, if your DS 2019 document was not issued by Indiana University, you need to check with that sponsor to see if they will authorize you for academic training. If you are sponsored by Fulbright or if you are sponsored by IIE, sometimes these organizations do not authorize academic training, so you would need to work directly with your sponsor to see if you were eligible. With academic training, you do have to have a job offer at the time that you apply for academic training. And similar to the F1 applying for a visa abroad, it can be also difficult for a J1 to apply for a visa abroad. Another visa option that we won't spend much time on, but we do have people that maybe you have a spouse who is also in the U.S. Maybe your spouse is on a J1 program, and maybe you finish your program at IU and you don't have a job immediately. And so maybe you decide to change status to J2. So you're going to be a dependent of your J1. At some point in your J2 status, you can choose to apply for work authorization if you would like to. J2 spouse work authorization does not require a specific employer. It does not require that you work within a specific field. You do have to apply directly and be approved by USCIS, so the Immigration Service has to decide that you're eligible. And often work authorization is approved for 1 year at a time, but it can be longer in some cases. So the J2 spouse probably doesn't apply to many of you, but again, we're providing you with a range of options that could be of use to you at some point in the future, depending on the specifics of your situation. And then there's one other J1 category. There is a J1 research scholar or professor. This is a visa classification specifically for someone pursuing research or someone pursuing teaching. And it is a limited up to 5-year visa classification for employment doing either research or teaching. And we're not going to go into detail about this category, but just know, as the other categories, there are advantages and there are limitations to this category, but it is an option if you want to pursue maybe temporary status in the U.S. as, for example, maybe you decide that you're going to stay for 1 or 2 years and do some lecturing to get some experience, and then maybe you have a position back in your home country that you plan to return to. The J1 research scholar or professor might be an option for you in that case. Okay. Another visa classification that we have students use to facilitate employment in some cases is the TN visa category. It used to be called Treaty NAFTA. NAFTA is no longer, there's a new acronym, but the TN visa category remains. This is specifically for Canadian and Mexican citizens. So if you are listening and you have a Canadian or Mexican passport, this could be an option available to you. It's fairly easy application processing. Canadians basically go to the border and show their documents. Mexicans do have to make an appointment at the embassy and get a visa stamp. But in general, it's a fairly easy process. And the TN category can be extended unlimited. So as long as you continue your employment, there are unlimited extension in this category. And there are no salary issues. Again, we'll talk about salary issues when we hit the H-1B. One of the limitations to the TN category is that it is for a limited list of professions. So not every position will fit into the TN category. You can go to the USCIS website or the Department of State website, and you can find a list of professions. So if your profession, the job that you're pursuing in the US falls into one of those categories, the TN might be an option for you. If your activity is not in any of the listed professions, then the TN would probably not be an option that would be available for you. Again, I mentioned that there are unlimited extensions with the TN. And one other thing with the TN is because there are unlimited extensions, it is still a non-immigrant category. So you still have to prove that you have a residence at home that you aren't abandoning. So there could be travel concerns if, for example, you maintain TN status for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. So your employer or your attorney who's working with you on a TN could talk to you about if your situation would raise any of those travel concerns. Okay. The E3 is a visa classification that is specifically for Australians. It is similar to the H-1B occupation classification that we will talk about in just a moment. There are salary requirements. Your employer has to submit an application for you if you are from Australia and you're going to use the E3 category. There are a certain number issued each year, 10,500. One of the benefits of the E3 status is that if you hold E3 status and you're working in the US and you have dependents who are here with you, your spouse dependent, for example, can also apply for work authorization. And within all visa classifications, it's not always that dependents can apply for work authorization. So this is a benefit to Australian applicants. And then the E3 is for an initial 2-year period, and then you can renew in 2-year increments indefinitely. So again, thinking of all of the options, if you're an Australian, keep E3 in the back of your mind as a possible option. And then the last one we want to talk about before we spend some time with the H-1B is the O1 visa classification. The O1 is for extraordinary ability in the science, arts, education, business, or athletic fields. It is a very paper-intense petition. We're filing, documenting that you meet this very high standard of, at the very top in your field of endeavor. And the O1 is an option even if someone is subject to a 2-year home residence requirement from a previous J status. So this is an option that we do see used occasionally in education, specifically for maybe someone who has completed their PhD and they've done a lot of writing, they've gotten a lot of peer reviews, they've participated in panels, they've received awards within their specialty area. So the extraordinary ability does take a lot of work and a lot of effort to prove that you're at the very top in your field. But because education is one of the categories that you can qualify in, we wanted to be sure to include that here specifically if anyone is doing cutting edge research in the field of education that might put them into this category. All right, and now we're going to move to the H-1B visa classification, whereas this is where we'll spend a big chunk of time. The H-1B is a work visa classification. It is specifically for employment. So, for example, your F1 student status, that is specifically for student status. It's specifically for study, but it allows for some employment. The H-1B is very specifically for employment. That's the main purpose of this category. The H-1B is a visa classification that allows for what we call dual intent. So, for example, on your F1 status, your J1 status, these are temporary statuses where you have to prove when you go to apply for your visa that you have ties to your home country that you do not wish to abandon, and so you don't plan on remaining in the U.S. for the long term. The H-1B is a little bit different in that it allows for dual intent. You can have the intent to remain in the U.S. long term, and you can have the intent to keep your residence in your home country. In most cases, there is a 6-year maximum in H-1B status. There are some allowances for extending beyond 6 years if a person has applied for permanent residence, but in general, we're looking at a 6-year maximum for H-1B status. Multiple employers can file an H-1B petition. So maybe you work for 2 employers. Each employer has hired you part-time. Each employer has filed their own petition allowing you to work for that employer. The H-1B allows for premium processing. The application is one that is submitted to the Immigration Service for processing. Typically, an H-1B application, once it is received by the Immigration Service, currently takes 4 to 6 months to adjudicate, and this premium processing option allows for adjudication within 15 business days, so significantly cutting down the processing time. The H-1B allows for portability. That means when you're working with one employer and you are going to end that employment, you can find employment with a new employer. That new employer can file an H-1B application with the Immigration Service, and you can port your employment and begin working for the new employer once their application is received by the Immigration Service. Another advantage, we've talked about spouses. If you have a spouse who is in H-4 status, in some very limited cases, an H-4 spouse might be eligible for employment. So not in all cases, but in some cases. There is an H-1B cap for industry. So if you are working for an industry, if you are working for an institution of higher ed, for example, if you are working for some government agencies, if you are working for some nonprofits, those employers are exempt from the cap, so not subject to the cap. Most industry employers are subject to the cap, meaning they are subject to the 65,000 H-1B numbers that are available every year, with an additional 20,000 for master's degree applicants. So basically, there's a pool of 85,000 H-1Bs eligible each year. And if you are looking for a position in industry, your position will likely be subject to that cap. So there's like a lottery system for that. The H-1B is employer specific. So you can only work for the employer who has filed a petition for you. The H-1B requires that the position require a bachelor's degree in a specific field at a minimum. So you may be completing your master's degree, but if you are applying for a position that does not require a master's degree, or, does not require a bachelor's degree, or does not require a bachelor's degree in a specific field, the position may not meet the H-1B requirement. So even though you have more than a bachelor's degree, we first have to establish, does the position meet the requirement? The H-1B does have a minimum salary requirement. The employer is required to pay at or above the prevailing wage as determined by the Department of Labor. So sometimes an employer cannot pursue an H-1B for an employee because the required wage may be higher than what they are able to pay. So that can be a limitation. And then if an applicant has spent any previous time in J status and they're subject to the 2-year home residence requirement, they may not be eligible for the H-1B classification. All right, on the next slide, there's information about H-1B fees. So not all of these work options that we're talking about require fees, but some of them do, and the H-1B is one that does. There are a whole list of fees listed here. If your employer is working with an attorney, there may be attorney fees. Your case may be a case that is eligible for premium processing. There's a fee for that. There are different fees based on if you are working with a CAP subject or a CAP exempt employer. So just keep in mind that there are fees, and sometimes an employer will not sponsor an H-1B because they don't want to have to pay all of these immigration fees. There is a regulatory requirement that the H-1B fees must be paid by the employer and that those fees cannot be passed on to an employee. All right. On the next slide, we're talking about the H-1B cap. I mentioned that there are 65,000 H-1Bs every year, and there are 20,000 additional H-1Bs for U.S. master's degree applicants or higher. The H-1B cap runs October 1 to September 30th. So if you are looking for an employer who's going to file an H-1B for you, they would be filing that application, generally requesting an October 1 start date. And the Immigration Service allows those applications to be filed 6 months in advance of the requested start date. If you are looking for employment with a CAP subject employer, depending on, what the economy looks like on any given year, the H-1B cap is often met within the first few weeks or the first few months after April 1st. So if you're working with an employer who is willing to file an H-1B for you, you'll want to make sure that that application is filed as soon as possible on or around April 1. And then if we have anyone who's from Chile or Singapore, keep in mind that there are additional numbers set aside for these two countries that do not count against that 85,000. So if you are from Chile or Singapore, you might have some additional options available within the H-1B cap. Okay. The next slide has to do with exemptions. I kind of already mentioned this. Certain employers, higher education, nonprofit, government organizations may be exempt from the cap, so we don't have to worry about when we file or if we'll take up one of those $85,000 numbers. If you have worked for an employer and you were counted against the cap previously, and for example, your employer is applying for an H-1B extension, you don't have to be recounted. You've already met that count previously, so you would be exempt on the second time. All right, and then one other thing we want to make sure you're aware of as students at IU, there is something called the Immigration Bridge on the next slide. And the Immigration Bridge is a partnership between IU and Fragaman attorneys. So you may be looking for employment and you find employment with an employer, maybe it's a smaller employer, or maybe it's an employer who's never filed an H-1B before. And so they aren't sure if they want to pursue this because they don't know what to do to file an H-1B. The IU Immigration Bridge allows you as an IU student to submit an e-form in Atlas where you provide us with information for the contact person at the employer where you have been offered employment, and we will connect your employer with an attorney at Fragaman Attorneys, and there is a set fee that Fragaman will work with your company to assist in filing the H-1B. So it's a benefit for you as a student who may be working with an employer that isn't quite sure what to do with the H-1B process. And so just keep that in mind as you're looking for employers. If you're talking to an employer who says, oh, we don't file H-1Bs because we don't have an attorney that can do that, just remember about the Immigration Bridge program, and we can see if your employer is interested in that. Okay, I'm going to take a moment again to stop and see if we have questions. We do have one question. There's a question about a postdoc position falling under a different visa category, and if that happens, would an OPT application become invalid? And so it's important to remember you can only have one visa classification at a time. So maybe your intent is to work in the US for as many years as you can. So you might want to think about, how do I maximize my employment options? Maybe as an F1 student, you complete your degree and you apply for your 1 year of OPT. Then if you are a STEM major, you apply for the additional 24 months of OPT. And then maybe you find a position with an institution as a postdoc, and the institution says, we will apply for a J1 for you. And so when you move into J1 status, then yes, the OPT, the F1 status is no longer valid. Once you change to a different status, then you lose the benefit that you had in the previous status. So each visa classification has specific allowances for what kind of employment-related activity you can do in that status. There's a question about the bridge program. That is for current students and alumni. So if you have, if you have a colleague who is an alum, they can also access Atlas using their IU login, and they can submit a request in Atlas for the Immigration Bridge program, and we can work to funnel that information to the attorney who would then follow up with the new employer. There's a question about a job offer. A job offer requiring a bachelor's degree and 7 to 10 years of experience. Would the person be eligible for an H-1B? So with an H-1B, we're looking at multiple things. First, we look at the position. Does the position meet the requirements for an H-1B? The regulatory requirement says that an H-1B position is a specialty occupation, a position requiring a bachelor's degree at a minimum in a specific field. So if this job offer requires a bachelor's degree in any field, the position is not H-1B eligible, probably. If this position requires a bachelor's degree in chemistry with 7 to 10 years of experience, then I would say, based on this limited information we have, that the position is probably eligible for H-1B status. So once we've determined that the position meets the H-1B requirements, then we look at, does the person meet the position requirements. So while you have a PhD, do you have a PhD in the required field? Do you have the required experience of the position? If yes, then you would probably be eligible to continue discussing pursuing an H-1B. If your degree is in a different field, if you do not have the experience required, then just because you have the PhD does not make you eligible for H-1B purposes for that position. So again, with an H-1B, we're looking at, does the position meet the regulatory requirement? If yes, does the person meet the position requirements? And those are the two prongs that are needed to consider if an H-1B can be sponsored. If you have a position that you're looking at, I would encourage you to talk to your employer. Your employer can help assess if you are eligible for the position, and if so, if an H-1B can be filed. Okay, that's all of the questions that I see at the moment. So we want to, let's see, hold on. We have a STEM student, a non-STEM student, PhD student. I also got a STEM master's. Can I use both OPTs? That's a really good question. You are eligible to apply for OPT in the category at which you complete that degree. So if you are a PhD student now, you would be eligible if you have not used your 12 months of OPT at the PhD level. You would be eligible for 12 months of OPT at the PhD level. You are not eligible generally to go backwards. You would not be eligible for your master's degree OPT or STEM OPT at the master's degree level. There are regulatory requirements as to when you need to apply for OPT based on when you are completing the given degree. So if you have degrees from IU specifically and you have a question about what OPT can I apply for and when can I apply, that's going to be a question that you're going to want to talk with an international student advisor who can help you determine what your options are and when the deadlines are for applying for what you might be eligible for. Okay. So we want to remind you again that you have options and you have to be an advocate for yourself. Sometimes people think if I don't have a green card or if I don't have permanent residence, I can't work in the US. And that isn't necessarily correct. So when you are applying for work authorization, when you're applying for positions in the US, there are ways that you can work without a green card. Again, we've talked in detail about optional practical training. You may be eligible for 12 months. If you're in a STEM field, you may be eligible for an additional 24 months, depending on the specifics of your degree program. So you can talk with an international advisor in OIS to determine your eligibility for OPT and when you should apply. Similarly, if you're a J student, you may be eligible for academic training, and there are timelines on when you need to apply for that. There are specifics like a job offer letter that you need for that. The H-1B is another option. Again, your employer may know how and be willing to file an H-1B on your behalf. If they are not, then consider seeing if they would be interested in the Immigration Bridge program where we could help connect them with an attorney to file an H-1B. If you're going into teaching or research, there might be J1 professor researcher options available for you to talk with an employer. You may meet the O1 exceptional ability category the TN, the E3. So just keep in mind that there may be other visa options available to you. All right, and then we also have a resource list available to you on the next slide on the OIS website. Again, there's detailed information about OPT and academic training. I know specifically within the School of Education, the School of Education does a great job with networking, pulling in alumni, using career connections to help students know some of their options available and to help with resources. So be sure to utilize any of those. There is a question that came up about the DS-160 and applying for the visa. Since this session is not specifically about the visa process, I won't answer that question here, but you can direct that question to OIS. You can call or email with that question and we'll help answer that for you. All right. I think that is all of the questions that I'm seeing that need an answer. So again, thank you for being a part of the session today. And again, we do want you to use OIS as a resource. If you have questions, you're welcome to use our website as a resource. You're welcome to call us, email us, or come to the office and we'll be glad to assist.
Thank you, Joanna. If you have any questions, we probably have some minutes, 1 or 2 minutes to answer the last questions. I do see that one in the Q&A section, there's a question about, is it recommended to complete both degrees together? So if I am a PhD student and I'm completing a master's degree, is it possible to use both OPT if I'm graduating together?
There will be some limitations on that. And that will be a question that you can talk with one of our student student advisors to help answer when you should apply, how much time you would be eligible for, that sort of thing. That's a question that's specific enough about a degree program that I would want an advisor to talk through that.
Got it. I do see
There's
another question.
another question about, do any of these visa options have a path toward a green card? This session was specifically about non-immigrant visa options. So this session was not about the permanent residence or the green card process, but yes, there are employment options that are employment pathways to permanent resident status or green card. And your employer can talk with you about that, or you can work with an immigration attorney about that. Depending on the specifics of your employment, you may be in an employment position that is eligible for sponsorship for a green card.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, we'll call it a day. Please do check out our webpage, YouTube channel, and that this link I just shared with you in the chat box. A recording will be uploaded soon after this webinar, and if you feel free to share it with your friends, with your colleague who might be interested in this topic. And if you have any questions, please contact the OIS. I'm glad that we have so many audience today. I hope you all enjoy this summer and stay safe, stay cool. Thank you. Bye.